Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. I recognize a lot of names, fewer faces, because nobody's got cameras on. That's fine, but that's right. Lots of names from the mags and several other students from SPGS. We're glad you could join us. We're fortunate enough today to have a group from the Army War College, which is located at Carlisle Barracks, right outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Join us for today, and you recognize the fact, maybe some of you, that none of the people in front of us are U.S. Army, so that's kind of ironic. But in any case, you're going to hear from some up and coming military officers, both in the U.S. military as well as the Pakistani military. The host, the program director for the program that brings these students to ASU is Dr. Ed Kaplan. Dr. Kaplan is a retired Air Force colonel who is now a professor of strategic studies at Army War College at Carlisle Barracks. And he will introduce both the program and then introduce us to his students. So, Dr. Kaplan.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Kubiak, and we appreciate you having us this year again. Despite it being remote, we really hope to have a good dialogue today. And that's the purpose of our visit to you. So thank you first for attending and being part of the audience. Before I introduce my students, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on what the Army War College is and what my program is. The Army War College is part of what we call professional military education. In the US, we have a series of professionalizing schools, which officers go through roughly every 7 years as they advance through their careers, if they're headed for assignments of a nature that is of greater responsibility. And the purpose of this is really to prepare them for those new responsibilities. You can think of it as the same kind of thing you would do if you were an entrepreneur and you decided to go get an MBA. It was to prepare you for operating at a higher level. So each of the services has a series of schools, and the Army's school for its most senior officers is the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the Army War College has been around since 1903. And our task is to prepare our students in their 10-month course for a position at the strategic level and the policy level. What do I mean by that? Well, in order for us to operate effectively at the strategic and policy level, our graduates have to be able to take 20+ years of military experience and translate that into good policy advice for people who don't necessarily have the same background in military affairs that they do. And that is an art. So over the course of 10 months, we try to equip them with the tools, cognitive tools and processes and ideas that will help them give what we call best military advice. An important skill that they pick up and that they refine in those 10 months is communication. A lot of it's written communication. Some of it, though, is speaking to audiences. Now, every student is going to speak to an audience at some point. Many of them are internal audiences, and we actually do have a requirement that every student speak to an external audience as well. But every year, a few students decide to go in depth into this program. And what they want to do is learn how to speak to the kinds of audiences that they are going to be encountering in their policy jobs. In other words, people who don't necessarily have a deep military background, but have an intense interest in policy and in strategic affairs. So people like you. And what we do in the Eisenhower Series College program, and what we've done for the past 50 years, is to take our students on the road in order to engage in a dialogue. My students prepare speeches on a couple of topics of current strategic or policy interest, but they do that in order to begin a conversation. And that's what I hope we'll have today. So now that I've explained what our program is, I'd like to introduce the first of my students, and we will take it from there. So, Brigadier, would you please take it up and introduce yourself?
Right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brigadier General Abdul Sami from Pakistan Army Corps of Engineers. I've had about 27 years of commissioned service, and my last 3 assignments have been dealing with the western border region of Pakistan, in which we border with Afghanistan, and there have been a lot of problems considering the global war on terrorism has been going on there for the past 2 decades almost, and there is a history of instability that is even goes way back than those 2 decades. So I have chosen my topic of research also, how to manage that border so that it does not become a reason why there is instability in that region. And I could go on and uh, formally introduce why I have chosen, and I'll do that over the next 8 minutes. Right. Uh, I am in my 27th year of commissioned service and married for 22 years, father of 2 talented daughters aged 21 and 17. One is pursuing her university education in finance and the other wants to be an artist. It really feels great to see one's children free to follow their dreams, doesn't it? But it's a privilege denied to many around the world. Etazaz Hassan, for example, was a 14-year-old boy in Hangu, a small northwestern town in Pakistan close to the Afghanistan border. He looked bigger for his age, tall and a tad heavy set. Walking towards the school on the morning of January 6th, 2014, he and his 2 friends were the last ones to reach the school gate. As the morning assembly was about to begin, Etazaz saw a suspicious-looking man about to enter the school. It was only when he spotted a detonator and an explosive-laden vest on the man, he confronted him. Despite the pleas of his fellow students, Etazaz grabbed the bomber with all his might. The terrorist panicked and detonated the vest, taking Etazaz with him. Imagine what made a 14-year-old do that. At that time, there were about 2,000 children in the school, and Etazaz's father, a laborer, summed it up well. He said, quote, "My son made his mother cry so much, but saved hundreds of mothers from this agony." Etazaz chose to sacrifice his life to save so many others. Now, later that dreadful year for us, on December 16th, 2014, in the northwestern city of Peshawar, terrorists brutally massacred 150 people in Army public school. 134 of those killed were children. These are 150 stories that are just too painful even to talk about. Mothers losing their children, children losing their mothers on the school staff, acts of bravery, acts of fire, acts of feigning death for hours to survive. About 1,000 survivors and their families have been traumatized and scarred for life. Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, a terrorist group, had claimed responsibility for the attacks, terming it a revenge on Pakistan for siding with the United States in the global war on terror. Those were very difficult times for Pakistan. By then, acts of terrorism had become an unpleasant norm in the western border belt of Pakistan. Terrorists would cross the porous Pak-Afghan border, carry out a physical attack, or plant an improvised explosive device, inflict casualties, and cross back over to the other side before the day ended. And for us, the practitioners of security apparatus, it was painful because all of these individuals would eventually get reduced to a statistic of how many terrorist incidents did we get, how many died, and how many got injured over a week, month, and a year. For a cumulative statistic, by that time, more than 65,000 people had died in Pakistan since the start of the global war on terror, including more than 8,000 personnel of the law enforcement agencies. Tactical brilliance and bravery of our soldiers on the rugged mountainous terrain would partially get undone by a pervasive enemy able to infiltrate across the border. This had to change. Our children like Etazaz and the ones from the school had to live and live out their dreams. By early 2017, the plans for border management infrastructure became front and center of our military effort. And I remained intimately involved with the entire process. But before I get there, a bit of orientation. Pakistan shares 2,611 kilometers of rugged and porous western border with Afghanistan. That's about 85% of the US-Mexico border, or a little more than the road distance from Niagara Falls in the north all the way south to Key West, Florida. Pak-Afghan border region has all sorts of terrain features: high mountains, hills, gorges, plains, forests, and prime desert even. In short, a nightmare of a border to manage. Free movement across the border was a centuries-old norm, with hundreds of frequented and less frequented routes along the border. Since Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and the global war on terror since 2001, instability in Afghanistan has routinely spilled over to Pakistan. That is, relatively free movement of terrorists, narcotics, and weapons, to name just a few. Well, this is now changing thanks to Pak-Afghan border fence. Learning from the pattern of terrorist incidents, we realized that the border fence had to have three distinct features. One, a few designated crossing points along the border where people with valid travel documents can cross over. Two, border outposts or fortifications along frequented and less frequented routes to stop illegal cross-border movement. And three, a border fence to run along the border and seal it. Hundreds of border outposts and a couple of thousand kilometers of border fence later, today, the border fence is nearly complete. And some of its advantages are already becoming obvious. Since start of the fencing in 2017, terrorist incidents have consistently dropped well over 40% every year, bringing the security situation to the level of peace not seen since the past almost 20 years of the global war on terror. Today, there is 95 to 98% drop in terrorist activities in settled areas of Pakistan, returning the life and economy back to the pre-war normal. Cross-border smuggling of goods, including the illegal ones, has dropped significantly. Purely from a security perspective, this is good news, all that we'd hoped for. There is no more terrorist incidents of consequence are happening these days. However, an even bigger impact has been the socio-economic one. For centuries, border meant little for the people living near Pakistan's western border region. Their trade, agriculture, and livelihoods were intrinsically connected with the other side. Until terrorism kicked in, this was acceptable to the state of Pakistan as well. A border fence meant realignment of the local socio-economic architecture as well. Over the last few years, thousands of kilometers of roads, hundreds of schools and healthcare centers, new markets and special economic zones have been constructed along the border region to provide greater market access, civic facilities, and alternate sources of income. It remains a work in progress at the center of Pakistan's border management strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to inform you that the results of this socio-economic intervention are equally transformative. People who are aware of the region, they tell you that the restive area that once used to be called as Federally Administered Tribal Area, or FATA, has recently been amalgamated with the adjoining province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And all elements of state governance have been extended to this once war-ravaged region. This is an historic achievement, completely inconceivable, to be fair, even a few years ago. Did the border fence make it happen? I'd say yes. So did a lot of brave men of the law enforcement agencies, civilians, and children who laid down their lives to bring peace. The border fence now is working as a catalyst. Let people and their innate resilience do the rest. What this fence does is that it provides security so that children like Etizaz don't have to die for their friends to live. hence is the reason why I have chosen this as the topic of my research. Thank you, and over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, and I'm sure it'll spur a lot of good discussion. Lieutenant Colonel Dones, can you please take up the mic?
So good afternoon, everyone. I am Lieutenant Colonel Aixa Dones. I have been in the Marine Corps for 26 and a half years. I initially enlisted in 1994 and worked as a signals intelligence operator, then attained my commission in 2002, and I am now a manpower officer, which is basically human resources. Other than human resources, I have experience in leadership, protocol, recruiting, entry-level training, executive administration, and I have held command as a captain and as a major. I am a proud parent of a beautiful young lady who is in her second year of college at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And let's see, the two topics that I am researching for my speeches are civil military relations and the disparity of minority female general officers in the Marine Corps. For my strategic research project, I am writing about the apparent lag in gender integration for Marine Corps entry-level training specifically. Initially, I wanted to write about something and a research topic that I knew nothing about. However, after addressing the topic of civil military relations here at the Army War College, I found that it was a hot topic of discussion, and I wanted to take advantage of the current interest and learn a little bit more about it. Also, as for the entry-level gender integration and minority female representation in the Marine Corps topics, well, those topics are near and dear to my heart. Additionally, I am selected to command 4th Recruit Training Battalion at Parris Island this summer. So I am ready and willing to answer any questions that you might have, and I am going to turn it over to my counterpart, Lieutenant Colonel Bartram.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Aixa. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you for all being here today. The topics that I chose to speak about are what unites us as a nation. And I tackle the problem from the lens of what happened on the 6th of January, where citizens of the United States stormed the Capitol during the certification of the last presidential election. And I talk about 7 principles that I think some really smart journalists went out and did a lot of research with the American public on that I think ring true on what unites the American public. And I talk about shared unity cohesion. It's a psychological term that kind of talks about how people who share a common goal and a common objective tend to unite in communities. And I talk about how civic involvement, education, and disconnecting from social media disempower those that would like to divide our society for their own purposes. Typically, they're internal and external actors, but one that I talk about a little bit is Russia and how they use social media to divide populations, and they've done it in several cases. It's called nonlinear warfare. So that's one of my topics. The other topic I talk about is immigration reform. And specifically, we have a STEM crisis in our country. If you look at China, they, on an annual basis, produce about 4.5 million STEM graduates, and that's internationally. And we produce somewhere on the order of less than 500,000, about 450,000. And some of that 450,000 are foreign students who are studying here in the United States. There are some STEM programs that only exist because of foreign exchange students. And I think we do a poor job of harnessing that intellectual capital and that intellectual capability for innovative purposes. What drives our economy is innovation, and we're doing kind of a poor job of harnessing that capital. From 2008 to 2016, there was about a 400% increase in those foreign exchange students coming to our country. And then actually a lot of those stayed, nationalized and became American citizens and are producing for our economy. And one of the policies under the last presidential administration was to limit H-1B and what's called OPT programs, which allowed STEM graduates to either stay in this country and work while they were studying, but also producing the economy after the fact under the H-1B program. And I argue that better oversight is the answer, not necessarily cutting off those avenues for people to study here in the United States. And then finally, my research project was on the rise of India as a great power in the Indian Ocean region, South Asia, and how the United States should do a better job and what it can do to do a better job integrating with the Indian military, along with the Indian leadership and policymakers, both at the diplomatic and economic levels, to kind of strengthen India. And one of the reasons is the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, some of you may have studied or learned about. And it's basically a power projection. The Chinese are doing it really to get rid of what they call the Malacca dilemma. China is the largest energy importer in the world, and about 85 to 90% of their energy goes through the Straits of Malacca. So they're very concerned about during any kind of hostilities or any kind of a war with another nation, the Straits of Malacca being closed off. So Belt and Road is really a economic power projection capability to secure what they see as a vital national interest. And I think the reason that really kind of interested me is I think that South Asia, I mean, our friend Sami from Pakistan, and it's really a region that's very diverse. It's hard to define. And it's also one of the fastest growing regions economically. And that's because it's over a quarter of the world's population. So it's a fascinating region to me. I think it's a very dynamic region. And I also think that from a conflict perspective, it's very complicated. And I'm sure some of you have questions on that. So I'm happy to answer all of your questions. I'm looking forward to talking with all of you today. And thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you all for those introductions and the short summaries of your work. What we'll do now is open up the floor up to questions from the audience. If you would be so kind as to use the reactions button, raise your hand to let me know you've got a question. And then when I call on you, please turn your camera on so we can see you, because it'd be nice to engage a human being and not just a text name on the screen. We'll make this as human as we possibly can. I'm going to do what I always try not to do, and that is take the prerogative of the host to ask the first question, though, just because it's kind of a big one and actually aims at Lieutenant Colonel Donis. It actually hits on both of your research areas. The news today or yesterday, I think it came out yesterday, that the Pentagon withheld the nomination of two female general officers into 4-star command positions because they were afraid the administration at the time, this previous administration, would have not accepted them or replaced them. What is your reaction to that? And what do you think that says about the Pentagon's leadership now? And again, I'm putting you on the spot, and I appreciate that. And I recognize these are your views and not the views of the Department of Defense, blah, 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 the standard disclaimer. But I think it's a really important topic, both in the civ mil world, as well as the relationship of females and serving in the military.
It's a great question, Jeff. Thank you so much for that. And I'll tell you what, yesterday, that was an extremely hot topic, not just in my seminar, but we have a discussion group afterwards. And two of the international officers that are in my seminar group, one from Indonesia and one from Denmark, kind of looked at me and were like, tell us how you really feel, you know? and my response, and I will be very honest, and my response to them was, I was a little upset, to be honest with you. And the reason I say that is because I feel that that's somewhat of a cop-out, right? Hold the administration to task, right? Put them on the spot as to whether they're going to or not approve these nominations, and have them answer as to why not. Because if the Department of Defense is in full support of those nominations by putting them forth to Congress, then the administration is going to have to tell us why not. So I personally had a sincere concern on that being the reasons why they would not put forth individuals during a certain time frame, especially again when one of my topics is, the lack of minority females within the Marine Corps general officer population. So further than that, that was my stance on it.
Yeah, hard not to. Yeah, that's kind of the general reaction, and I appreciate your honesty and obviously your candor in the situation. It's a difficult situation to be in, and it is disappointing. I mean, we've come across paths with some of the leadership in the Pentagon now, and it's anyway. I'll leave my personal views out of it. One of our attendees, Rashab Chatty, would like to provide just a short framing of him, of who he is and or she. I don't know. I recognize it's the cat. And you're not a cat. Tell me you're not a cat, Rashab, because I'm not going to call on you if you are. And then ask your question, please.
Yeah, of course. So what's up, everyone? My name is Rashab Chatty. I'm a freshman at Arizona State University, double majoring in global studies and political science, minoring in economics and civic and economic thought and leadership, and completing certificates in human rights, political history and leadership, and religion and conflict. I also work with the Korean Center for Mass Atrocity Prevention as a research associate and with the International Campaign for the Rohingya. And I also have a book coming out on extremism and polarization either this summer or next winter. And so my question kind of revolves around this entire idea of counterterrorism and counter-extremism practices and the ways in which governments and militaries respond to these organizations and such. So my philosophy kind of revolves in the entire principle of Satyagraha, as my grandfather marched alongside Gandhi during the Salt March. And I kind of have an idea of battling the ideology behind terrorist organizations and extremist organizations rather than battling the organization itself, as more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach towards terrorism and those sort of organizations. So I was kind of wondering, what are your takes on whether or not, or how effective military responses to terrorist organizations are as opposed to more proactive approaches?
Anybody? General Sami? Yeah, General Sami.
I'll try that, Rishabh. It's a brilliant question. I think it's a question that has less convenient answers and many inconvenient answers. And the inconvenient answer is that it's a lot difficult to address the root causes of terrorism. Rather than saying that so many terrorists have been killed or such and such threat has been neutralized. For example, U.S. campaign in Afghanistan, for example. I mean, there would be a lot to say how that campaign has succeeded in the military domain, but at the same time, has it really? Because when the US walks out, assuming it does, maybe a few months, a few years, a couple of decades down the line, whenever US decides to disengage from Afghanistan, are we any closer to sustainable peace there? So it's easier to quantify in the military terms what success is. It's really difficult in the non-military terms how to define success. And it takes a very long time, generations perhaps. So excellent question. I wish I had the answer. Thank you.
I think that's a very good answer, actually, General Sami. Colonel Bartram?
Hey, Rashab, first of all, very impressive resume. Sounds like you're a very smart guy and you're working very hard.
ASU standard, actually.
Yeah, no,
I'm sure your mom is not impressed as yet, so keep working.
Well, no, and I say that because you were speaking and I was thinking to myself, man, this guy's got his stuff together, smart guy. So anyways, not to flatter, but I think one thing that I find interesting about your question is the Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition, which I know has been criticized by some as kind of being a little sectarian in its approach. But the reason I think it's important for organizations like that to go out and do what they're doing is that I think one of the important things about countering terrorism is relationships. And in my very limited experience in the Middle East, it seemed that the biggest breakthroughs we had were when people weren't just there for 12 months checking their ticket, doing their mission. They were getting involved in the community and really trying to develop relationships with the community leaders there. And I think one of the reasons why that organization seems to be doing a pretty good job, especially against ISIS, and ISIL is just their credibility, where they're coming from and who they are, and their ability to tie into relationships within the communities that they involve themselves with because they're there for the long haul. Again, I don't have all the answers. That's just my very low level of knowledge, but that's a very good question, and I hope they can continue to be successful. Over.
So Rashad, if I may also want to appreciate the question, and we'll also jump on and note that you have a very impressive resume. Towards the end of your comments, I want to say that what I heard from your question was, what can, other than military response, what other avenues do we have to respond to terrorism? Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm attempting to address the appropriate question that you were addressing.
Yeah, kind of along those lines. I definitely agree that there has to be some sort of military presence in areas in which terrorist activities are quite abundant. But my philosophy kind of centers around, I guess, putting more resources towards preventing the rise of terrorist organizations rather than reacting to the influence of terrorist organizations afterwards. And so I was kind of wondering, like, what your thoughts on, like, where researchers should kind of go would be.
So where to go so outside of military reactions, how can we further prevent terrorism through other avenues? Is that correct? So, in addition to what's already been provided, I'm going to go the human approach, right? From the cultural aspect, we need a sense of a lot more understanding. Right. We were talking yesterday, again, we have these discussion groups when we prepare for our comprehensive exams. And it's very fortunate for us to have international, officers here with us, because they give us definitely different perspectives. And one of the aspects that the Indonesian officer consistently brings up to us is the topic of tolerance, right? At what level does tolerance not become enough, right? What are the actions? Where's the line drawn for tolerance? Where's the line drawn for understanding? And maybe some of the reactions that we get or receive, or that occur from many of these, violent extreme organizations, is because of this historic intolerance or misunderstanding. So if I could offer you any area to do more research on, it would be, where are we missing each other, right? Where is the misunderstanding occurring? And at what point, or where is it, right? What area is going to allow us that we're probably going to agree to disagree, but what topic is going to bring us to the table where we can at least have a conversation so that we can move forward beyond conflict? Over.
Great. Very good. Very good answer. Not a particularly inquisitive crowd. Anybody else got a question out there? I don't see any hands up, and nobody's sending me a note in the chat. I could keep coming up with questions. I'm sure that the panel would love that.
Hey, Jeff, we can just talk about airplanes if nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, right. We're just got both James and I flew B1, so we can just talk about B1s if we want. Go ahead, Jill.
Thank you. Thank you for making this session available to the public, and thank you all panelists and guests for your sacrifice and service. I'm a proud Arizona State alumna, W.P. Carey School of Management graduate program in information management a couple years ago. I currently reside in Pinehurst, North Carolina, which is near Fort Bragg, which my research indicates is a pretty significant base in our military apparatus. I'm new to the community, loving every minute of it. My question today is probably something that all of the panelists can chime in on, although I think one in particular may want to raise his hand. I am a nonprofit founder, cut to the chase. I'm a nonprofit founder seeking to help military families and veterans have access to a digital online space that helps them stay connected, and just share some of life's, sort of mundane updates, sort of like social media or some, just staying connected in general, but especially on deployment. I'm really passionate about this work and the research that's coming out and just emerging trends around radicalization and disinformation campaigns online, particularly with social media. I'm just wondering if the panelists could speak to, from a leadership perspective, if there's any just ongoing conversations about how just the concerns that you may have about our soldiers and servicemen and women stepping into places like Facebook and other platforms, becoming a bit radicalized, and then also not having great alternatives to do sort of the beautiful side of social media, which is staying connected to loved ones and friends and family, especially on deployment. And again, thank you for allowing me to raise the question.
So if the other panels don't mind, I'll jump in real quick on two topics, right? So the social media platform, Jill, thank you for supporting first and foremost, right? And for everything that you do. And realize there are existing platforms on there. They all have their little niches, right? And I'll give you an example of a non-military supportive, which is normally in my speech. There's this organization called Truth in Recruitment, and they are not supportive of the military, but in the same space, right? There's so many other organizations that do exist that support the military. And I'll give one is in regards to a reading program. So there's an online space where service members can record themselves reading a book. They can send this book to their child, and that way the child is able to see the video and read the book with their family member who's deployed. They used to do this by, and I know probably half the students in this class don't know what CDs are, right? So they used to record them on little CDs and send them home because, we just didn't have all these different platforms available to us. I will also give you another example of entry-level training. There's this application called Sandbox, and I believe all the armed services are using it now, and they use it for the recruits for entry-level training, where the parents and family members can just go on on your phone, type them a letter, and that same day it gets printed out on the depot and it gets given to the recruits. And then the recruits, do their little letters, and it gets sent to wherever this network gets, and it gets scanned so that the contact time is lessened. So, an answer in response to your question specifically, there's so many different needs. We probably couldn't cover them all. But I think first and foremost, you want to do something outstanding. Please encourage you to continue to do that. And two, what exactly it is where the gap exists. I would definitely just encourage you research different areas and definitely go into the base and speak to the different individuals down there, because there's so many different subject matters and areas that you could attend to. And at the end of the day, we appreciate, right? All goodness is goodness, and we appreciate everything that you're doing and anything that you come up with. So keep us posted, keep in contact with us, and I'll definitely encourage whatever it is that you end up doing. And I'll pass it over to my teammates over here for their responses.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Myers, thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. I sincerely appreciate your question. I think from my research, a couple of things stand out with what you asked. I think the first would be that individuals who are part of a community, they express their identity with feelings of belonging with each other. But what typically happens in social media and where we get into trouble is when we get into what's called an echo chamber, right? When we get into these lifestyle enclaves on social media that just bounce the same ideas off of each other without any kind of external perspectives, right? So I think what's really important, what you're trying to provide, is kind of that diversity of thought and diversity of mindset and perspective. And so something that I've found very useful in my journey is when I'm interacting with people, it is not always to be around the same type of people, right? To make sure that I'm getting perspectives from people that are not like me, so that I can ensure that I'm not kind of going down this deadly path of everybody saying yes, the yes man or the yes woman mentality, right? Groupthink is another way of thinking it. So that was the biggest thing that stood out to me in your question, is just getting that diversity of thought, which is a challenge, especially if you let the user determine who they're interacting with. So one thing that works really well that I've seen on some social media platforms is where people pop up to talk to you that may not be from your particular background or demographic group. The other thing is just civic involvement and disconnection from social media too. So having a platform that kind of promotes that balance, right, is another key facet that stuck out in my mind. But thank you for your question. I hope I helped a little bit, and best of luck to you. I hope whatever you come up with is a really useful tool for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. I think I'll only share my compliments, and I think there's plenty for us to learn too. We have a large group of veterans and the families of the serving people who are serving away from home a lot of times. And I think use of social media, I think it's a message I'll take back home. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your
Thank you,
question,
sir.
Joe. Good luck. Good luck to you, Joe. Appreciate you showing up. Anybody else got a question? I'm going to give you a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to ask another one because I just, holy cow. All right.
Looks like we hear from Esteban.
Yes. Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your day to be here and discuss with us. It's not every day that, college students get to talk with high-ranking, military officers. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a junior at ASU. I'm also an Army reservist. I went in as an IT specialist, 25 Bravo. So, thank you all for taking the time. I think it means a lot that, junior soldiers like myself can talk with you guys. Now, the question I want to propose specifically to you, sir, Lieutenant Colonel James Bartram, but anyone else is free to answer it as well, is radicalization happening in the military? You mentioned the January 6th Capitol riots, and it blew up on the news that some of them were veterans, and there could possibly be some active members, either in the National Guard or the active military, that were part of those. And me personally, it really is discomforting, but also I think there's a perception of how the civilian world views the military, and I think it is a big issue. A lot of me and my fellow soldiers were not, extremists, but I do know that I've met people throughout my time in the military who kind of, lean towards those kind of radical ideas, and it's not exclusive to only the right and the left. It could be a disgruntled military veteran who wants to be anti-establishment, or someone who develops these kind of anti-government ideas while they're in the military. And I just want to ask you guys, but specifically you, sir, what do you think is an appropriate response? Because I know right now they're trying to deal with that. I know we're going to get a talk on radicalization in the military from my commander, but I just want to ask you guys on what do you think is the appropriate approach?
Yeah, and that's going to be a question for Colonel Dunas too, going into the recruiting in the recruiting business. That's going to be a really important piece. So I'd love to hear from all three, because I'm sure the Pakistani military has had issues along the same lines. So great question, Esteban.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I agree, Jeff. Definitely want to hear from Ike's on this one. So hey, first off, if we find extremists in the military, there's no place for them, right? So if somebody is identified, it starts in the recruiting chain. I'll let Ike touch on that piece. But in the ranks, I've been a commander. If you find individuals who are behaving in a manner that is not upholding to the ideals of military service, then they're gone. That's what we do. If we identify individuals that do that. Now, the trouble, as you identified, is folks may have those views and they don't make them public, right? And that's where, if they're not breaking the law, then what do you do? And so that is obviously an issue. And so we need to find individuals who are perpetuating these ideas. We need to educate the community within the military and let them know, hey, this is unacceptable behavior if you are doing it and we don't know about it. And then once you lay the standard out, if somebody breaks that standard, then you need to hold them accountable. Absolutely. But let's go back to the community piece. The military as a part of our national identity and our national community. The military, this is a big part of trust, right? So we all know what happened after the end of the Vietnam War, the Vietnam conflict, and the trust that the military had to re-earn with the American public. If this continues and we don't solve it or we don't nip it in the bud the way we should, it could become an issue of trust with the American community. So that's something that, in my opinion, needs to continue alongside any efforts within the military to hold members accountable who are extremists, if that is indeed happening. And at the same time, either reestablishing or bolstering the trust that we have with our community, our nation. I hope that helps answer your question. Aixa, I'm sure, has much better things to say about it than I do, but that's my take.
So thanks. I'm just going to build on what James is saying. First and foremost, we should all understand that it is not tolerated in the armed services, right? It's just not tolerated. Just like James mentioned, if it is overtly seen or known about, then you're going to get separated. As to recruiting in, even our tattoo policy, if there is a tattoo that seems like it is perpetrating any type of bias, then just not admitted. You can't even come in, right? You're automatically disqualified at that point. So even at the entry level, we kind of ensure we put that stop sign. But I think the biggest consideration that we need to take is, or understand, the conversation is first and foremost about liberty, right? This is why we love this country, because we have the freedom to express ourselves. And sometimes individuals take that freedom to where they're crossing that line that now you may potentially be impinging on someone else's freedom and or their rights. We as service members understand that we sign off some of our rights. When we sign that contract or we raise our right hand and take that oath as commissioned officers, we choose to understand that some of our rights are not going to be the same as our civilian counterparts, because we are choosing to serve an organization that we understand that there are going to be things that we cannot do, i.e. during protests, right? We can't wear our uniform at a protest. We can't associate ourselves with our service at certain events. So those are decisions that we make first and foremost. So the individuals need to understand that. But as an institution, right, as just good people, we also need to understand that that's not something that's ever going to be tolerated. We are here to protect, serve, defend the Constitution of the United States first and foremost and above everything. And we take that very seriously. All service members do. I take, huge pride in the Marine Corps, because every rank that we promote someone to, whether enlisted or officer, we administer, whether it's the oath of enlistment or the oath of office. And I think the reasoning for that is to remind individuals, right? Is to remind individuals of that oath that you're taking, especially as you ascend higher and higher in your leadership billets. So I assure you, it is definitely something that's a conversation. I don't know if you saw in the news that many of the retired general officers, all of the, heads of each of the services, to include the Joint Chiefs, they signed an open letter saying this is not acceptable. And we will not tolerate, these types of aggression or movements or ideals, right? There's no place for it in the military. Over.
General Sammy, do you have a comment about extremism in the ranks from your experience in the Pakistani military?
Right. I think it's. I don't want it to turn into a lesson of history, but of course we did when the Afghanistan. In Afghanistan in 1979, the Soviet invasion took place. It was considered at that time that, religion could be used as an idea, as an instrument to be used. And the concept of jihad, somebody found that from some obscure books, and somebody brought it up and kind of, militarized the concept, and Mujahideen came up and all that. It worked for a bit, because I think the US, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan joined together and a superpower of that time, Soviet Union, was, I think, evicted from Afghanistan, and reasons to believe that it was one of the reasons why it got dismantled, Soviet Union. It worked well for a little bit, but it did radicalize a small portion of our society as well. And some of them thought that religion is something bigger than the national interests, the state. And I think we struggled with it for the past, for the initial 2 decades after that war. And until the early 2000s, we had a serious challenge with this. But it is no more the case now. And I think the realization that the kind of barbarity, these people who put a mask of religion on themselves and kill children in the schools and do atrocious things. So they do not necessarily represent the religion that the people in the military think that they also represent. So I think it's a challenge that we struggle with for at least 2 decades. For the past 15 years, not so much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good question, Esteban. You read my mind. That was the one I had queued up in my head if nobody asked it. So good on you.
No, and let me just say thank you so much for answering my question and sharing your guys' wisdom with me. I'm immensely proud of, being part of the Army Reserve and the people that I get to serve alongside with. It's been a lot of good people that I've been serving with. So thank you so much.
Great. One last question I think we have time for probably, and this one comes from a recent graduate of our MA in Global Security, Simon Lee, who is also a vet. He's got a question. Simon, kind of have to keep it short. We're inside of 5 minutes now.
Got you. Well, thank you for your time. And this one is for Lieutenant Colonel Donis. I'm actually corporally I'm in the Marine Corps Reserve, so raw man. But my question is there a significant push for inclusivity under this new administration and particularly under the new SecDef? And how does your push for inclusion and representation work within the chain of command of the Marine Corps?
So first and foremost, Rura, Semper Fi, appreciate your service. And thanks for that question. So inclusivity, with the administration and others, again, this is my opinion, right? This is a total my opinion. I don't think there's ever been an administration, at least within the last few years, that haven't supported the military first and foremost, right? And then even within the military, right, all the minority side of the house, I don't think there has been any aggressive campaign against it, if that makes any sense. Now, within our own ranks, I think we're just going through the generational, hey, it's getting older and older, it's becoming an older and older topic. So I will tell you, again, I mentioned I've been in the Marine Corps for 26 and a half years. I came in when females in the Marine Corps were running 1.5 miles, right? So completely different type of even physical fitness standards at the time when I first came in. And I have never, in my 26 and a half years in the Marine Corps, ever felt that I was being treated differently just because I'm a female or because I'm Hispanic. I'm Puerto Rican by nationality, born and raised between both, Puerto Rico and Chicago. And I've never had any issues or concerns from that perspective. But I will say, does it exist? Absolutely. I have plenty of friends that have felt that they were discriminated against in some form or fashion. But me personally, based on the national security strategy that has come out there, right? All the guidance that we have received, each of the individual services, their heads will send out some type of guidance, right, within their particular service. And every single one of them address minorities. Every single one of us address, inclusion. They include diversity. And they say that and they address it because it's very important, right? It's more than just about the multinationalities, right? It's more than just about gender integration. It's about the capabilities and the capacity that these individuals bring to the team, right? It's all about the force multiplier within any organization, whether it be a business or whether it be a military institution. So to answer your question directly, I think there is a lot of support on it. You all will have plenty of public releasable information that comes out from the Department of Defense and from the individual services out there to read about that specifically state those particular items are very important to each of our services and within the DoD and the administration.
Thank you.
Colonel Barchin, did you want to chime in there too? Because I think inclusivity is kind of a function of some of the research you've been doing on kind of national identity and those sorts of things too. Obviously, various cleavages in American society exist along the lines of some of the issues that are raised by that question. I was wondering if you've come across anything interesting in that regard.
Honestly, I would echo a lot of what Aix has already said. It's one of those issues that in the United States military, as Aix has said, has been going on for so long that I think sometimes atrophy becomes an issue. And you have to continuously strive to have the most diverse group of people that you can have in the room. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You cannot have a monolithic, or excuse me, that's the wrong word. You cannot have a homogeneous group of people leading the military, because the military is a microcosm of society. And so you've got to have that diversity of thought. You got to have different groups of people within the leadership chain that can give you those different perspectives. And if you're not doing your very best to include them, then you're failing. And so it's a persistent issue that continues to need attention. And until we, it's one of those issues that you'll never solve, honestly, either, because you'll always get to a better level, but it's never going to be perfect. And we have to continue to strive to do the very best we can with it. So I'll echo what Aix has said, and I'll also say that we still have a lot of work to do, in my opinion. Over.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. Good to see you. I think we're inside of 60 seconds now, and I'm kind of a stickler for timing. So if it's okay with everyone, let's thank the panelists and our guests for sharing their ideas and thoughts and spending the time to come visit with us today. We appreciate that a lot. It means a lot. It's really important to have this conversation. I know the research you all are doing are actually, it warms my heart to hear some of the topics that you're all willing to talk about to this kind of group, and the kind of areas in which you're doing research are absolutely spot on. That you seem, I'm very, very encouraged by how well connected you seem to be to the pulse of the nation. That's critically important as a vet myself, to know that the current force doesn't see itself as something apart from, but certainly representative of and a part of this society. So I appreciate your time, your energy, and what you're doing, and Godspeed going forward in your leadership roles in your respective military outfits. Dr. Kaplan, please bring back a group next year so we can have the same exchange, because it was very beneficial.
We're looking forward to it, both tomorrow's engagement and I hope next year's as well.
Very good. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and Ed and the panelists, will see you tomorrow in class.
Thank you,
Sounds good.
everybody.
Jeff, I put my contact information in the chat just in case people decide they want to ask questions after the fact. I have no problems answering them after.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Ed Ed can have contact available for the rest of you as well. It would be really good. So I will pass that along.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Good afternoon.
See you.
Thank you.